All right, hello everyone. My name is Dr. Avriel Licciardi, and we're going to get started with this month's webinar. If anyone can let me know in the chat if they can see and hear me, okay, that would be wonderful. All right, it looks like we're in business. So again, I want to welcome everyone to this month's LetPub webinar, and thank you for joining us, whether you're a new attendee or you've been with us for the past couple of months or so. Today's webinar topic is building and maintaining an international research program, which is something that's pretty universal for researchers to accomplish regardless of their discipline. Today we have actually 4 speakers with us, myself and then my colleague, Dr. Clark Holdsworth, who is the Research Communications Manager of LetPub. Clark is going to be in the chat, monitoring the chat for us today at the webinar, so if there's any issues with any technical problems, he'll be able to resolve those for us. This is also one of our special webinars where we have some guest speakers. We have Dr. Jill Licciardi of the University of New Hampshire today, and then we have Dr. Don Rodbell from Union College, who both are not only established professors, but they've also generated their own international research programs and many international collaborations as well. So this is a really excellent opportunity for you as attendees to ask them any direct questions about accomplishing an international research program, or really just collaborations in general. So before we get started with the content of the webinar, I do just want to highlight a few of the Zoom features that we have today. So again, our webinar is in Zoom. One of the features is, of course, the chat room, which many of you have already discovered. You're welcome to use the chat to go back and forth with attendees throughout the presentation. However, if you do have questions related to the content of the webinar, please enter those questions into the Q&A function. Importantly, if you see that a fellow attendee has already asked a question that you'd like an answer to, all you need to do is simply upvote that question in the Q&A function, and the questions with the most upvotes at the end of the presentation will be answered first during our Q&A session. We, of course, will try to get through all the questions that the attendees ask, and we really do encourage you to ask questions. You can enter them at any time throughout the presentation. Again, please use this opportunity to ask whatever questions you have relating to building collaborations and research connections. Also, I just want to highlight that after this presentation, you will receive a follow-up email. And in that email, you will have a link to the full recording of today's webinar if you want to go back and revisit the recording. And there's also going to be a link to the certificate of completion if that's something that you desire. So with that in mind, I just want to give a little bit of an introduction on myself before we jump into the content itself. Again, my name is Dr. Avriel Licciardi. I'm an associate editor here at LetPub. Prior to joining the scholarly publishing industry, I was a geologist. I got my master's in geology from the University of New Hampshire, where I worked in the Andes Mountains of Peru. And then I jumped up to the Northern Hemisphere and looked at glacier change on the mountain glaciers that surround the Greenland ice sheet in Greenland. Working at the University at Buffalo and earning my PhD in the geological sciences as well. Based on my research, I do have international experience in working with international scientists as well as domestic scientists, both within my department and within different universities. But I don't have quite as much experience as our guest speakers today, which is why we've brought them in. So Joe, if you want to introduce yourself quickly and some of your maybe collaboration background, that would be great.
Sure, thank you. And it's great to see a lot of people tuned in right now. So as Avriel said, my name is Joe Licciardi. I'm a professor in the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of New Hampshire, currently also serving as the department chair. And my experience working internationally started when I was a graduate student, and I had connections to universities in France, and I went there for the purpose of training individuals in laboratory techniques. And then I later initiated projects in Iceland and Peru as a postdoc and an early career researcher. And since then, I've done more work throughout Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, Greenland, and then also in South America in Ecuador, Peru, and Chile. My primary expertise is in glacial geology and also volcanology, and you can kind of see that reflected in the two photos I have on my slide here. And I'll be happy to answer questions towards the end of this webinar.
All right, thank you, Joe. Don, it would be great if you could introduce yourself as well.
Okay, just unmuted. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here and see such a wide audience. Like Avi and Joe, I'm also a glacial geologist, and I started working internationally as a graduate student, first in New Zealand, and then a little bit in Baffin Island, Canada, and then mostly since 1986, I've been focused on Peru, Ecuador, and a little bit of Bolivia on the glacial geology of and climate records from lakes in those areas. So that involved a lot of international collaboration, mostly in the Peru work, and getting projects off the ground there. So it's been a multi-decade adventure of international collaborations. And one of the advantages, I suppose, of being a geologist is that we all travel to these countries and work with people in country more so than perhaps other fields would. So with that, we can move on.
All right, well, thank you, Don. As you can see, we have some very good expertise with us, and it's going to be great to have your questions answered by our two guest speakers. So again, as we go through the content of the webinar right now, feel free to always input your questions into the Q&A function of Zoom. So before we even get to the content itself, I do just want to highlight that the reason that we wanted to do this webinar on establishing international research collaborations is because in academia, this is often something that researchers find as an expectation of that they're required to do. And this is quite difficult because many of us don't even know where to start, regardless of it maybe being an expectation to get a promotion to associate professor or full professor. So we want to really help you guys get some insight into the best ways to start these collaborations. So for today's content, I'm going to briefly review the basics, which is simply the benefits of collaboration, and then kind of go through the 3 stages of establishing an international research program, or just a very successful research program that involves a lot of collaborations. The first step is, of course, initiating that collaboration. Often that's tied in with networking opportunities. Then once you've planned what you want to do, you've reached out to potential collaborators, you'll then build the project with that collaborator or collaborators, and then ultimately maintain your research program. As Don just said, it's been, many years that he's been working in these locations. So it's not simply something that can be super short. It can be, a collaboration can be, but oftentimes you put a lot of effort into building them and then you maintain them for the rest of your career. As part of this presentation, we also want to highlight on some of the difficulties or obstacles that you as researchers might encounter when you're collaborating with others. These are things just to be, keep an eye out for, keep a watch out for, and then understand how to overcome those difficulties if you do encounter them. And after the presentation, of course, we'll have our Q&A, and we'll bring Joe and Don back for all of your questions, and I also have a few questions of my own. So with that, the first question is, of course, why should you collaborate? The first thing we have here is you acquire expertise beyond that which your own research group covers. That's pretty much the most straightforward answer. Even though you may be an expert in your own field, oftentimes you need assistance from another scientist or another researcher to accomplish or address the research question most comprehensively. You can collaborate, of course, to establish a worldwide network of colleagues. This can be both in terms of scientific promise, but also learning about different cultures. It's often very appealing to funding agencies or institutions or universities for you to be a successful collaborator. That's something that employers look for because you're able to demonstrate your ability to carry out research in cooperative partnership. So you're able to be a team member. this is something that you can prove being a collaborator, which then transfers to being, you know, a communicative faculty member in a department. And it's also very important because collaborations often increase your publication outreach. I'm sure many of us reading papers notice that most publications have more than one author. And it's generally positive to publish with colleagues in general, but even more so with colleagues from different institutions or from different countries. So the first step in initiating a collaboration is not even asking someone to collaborate with you, but it's to plan not only why you want that collaboration, but also a successful project that you're looking for partners for. So you need to clarify why you want to start a domestic or an international collaboration. Do you need a different experience from somebody? Are you lacking resources where you currently are? Or are you just simply looking for a different perspective on a question that you're trying to address? Also, are you looking to apply to a certain funding agency, but realize that your chances of funding aren't going to be as high unless you have an international collaborator? So you do need to do a little bit of background research before you start reaching out to others. It's also pretty essential to have a clear aim for what your project is. What is the overarching goal of your project? And why do you need others to help you? These are pretty basic questions, but it is very good to think about them before going in. And then specifically, can you get that help within your department, within your university, or do you need to reach out to a different university within your country or a university that's international? It's also important to consider what you're looking for in a collaborator, what you want for that partner. How are they going to make your collaboration successful? It's important to consider, if you're looking for an international collaboration, whether or not there are cultural differences or even language barriers that you need to be aware of, and how you are going to address those obstacles. One of our best tips is that you should ask a trusted colleague for insight regarding your potential collaborator's reputation of reliability. So most of us are probably going to start by going to our advisors or our supervisors, because we're probably likely to stay in our same field doing our collaboration. So if you reach out to your supervisor, you say, you know, you're interested in working with person A, they might have some kind of background insider knowledge on whether or not that person would be a good match for your collaboration. It's always good to reach out and ask questions, especially to people that you've trusted and that you've been working with. Once you're ready to reach out to a collaborator, there are important things that you should consider. We've listed a few questions here. Importantly, are they going to be a good communicator? Are they going to be responsive? Generating a project with someone requires a lot of back and forth. It requires people to meet deadlines. So are they a timely person? Do you know if they're a good team member in general? And this is not just if they're a good team member within your own specific lab space or field space, but, you know, do they have any sort of reputation for already working internationally? An important thing for me is if their work style is similar to mine. Are we going to be complementary in that manner? It's also important to understand that you shouldn't just collaborate with someone to increase the number of collaborators on a project. Each scientist that is a collaborator with you should lend additional credibility and validity to your project. This is important when funders look at proposals. Each PI or principal investigator kind of needs to bring their own expertise to the table, so to speak. Overlap between investigators is something that funders don't view as positively because they don't understand why one person wouldn't be able to do the work and why you need to. And then lastly, if there are language barriers, how are you actually going to overcome them? Is it going to be challenging? Are both parties willing to work together with that? So these are things to consider when you are seeking someone to work with. Once you've planned your project, kind of developed your idea, and you're ready to actually go and meet some people, the first step in initiating that collaboration is, of course, reaching out to somebody and networking. One of the most straightforward ways for a researcher to accomplish this is, of course, having an interaction at scientific conferences or meetings. Of course, you would attend some talks of interest, perhaps of someone that you wanted to collaborate with, and then you'd wait for them after the session and you'd strike up a conversation. Doing this at a poster presentation is also very can be a little daunting, but is usually very casual and a great way to kind of pitch your idea or just open a discussion. Many departments or universities also invite speakers to give talks. This is something that you should also be attending. You can always, again, engage with these individuals after their presentations. Perhaps if you're a little bit further along in your career, a PhD or postdoc or an early career scientist, and you're ready to apply for funding, you can apply for funding with different colleagues or reach out to others to apply for funding together. This will be something that initiates that collaboration and project development. You can always go visit foreign institutes, and this is something that you can do, especially when you're a graduate student. There's also a lot of funding to help you get somewhere internationally, and that funding is not always as readily available as you get further along in your career. So if you go to an institute, perhaps with people that you think you might want to collaborate with down the road, this is a very good way for you to initiate that collaboration. If you are a professor and you are supervising students, a way to initiate a new collaboration would be to jointly supervise a student. And this can be within different departments in your university, within your department itself, or between departments or between universities, domestically or internationally. And then it's also critical to understand that you meet a ton of scientists throughout your research career. Say you were somewhere different for your master's and then your PhD, your postdoc, and then eventually your faculty position. That's 4 different institutes that you have, met colleagues, you have networking opportunities, and it's always important to have those in your back pocket. So the next question here I have is, how do I initiate a collaboration conversation? So I just, rambled off a few things about probably that many of you have heard before. Like, of course, you know that you can attend a conference and ask some questions to people. But really, how do you start that conversation? Importantly, junior scientists really do benefit from help from their supervisors. Oftentimes, a lot of our connections, mine, especially my connections, were started because my supervisor introduced me to another professor who also had graduate students that I then made connections with. This can be done, of course, in person, but of course also by email, and that may be the situation that we have for the foreseeable future. And it is very important for you to follow up and continue these conversations. If you are feeling a little bit more bold, you can, of course, always approach a potential collaborator yourself, but it is important that you should be prepared beforehand and also understand that everyone is busy. So if you are going to approach somebody, you should make sure to make your pitch about your project interesting. And if you do ask them to join, you should always offer something in return. And what I have here are some suggestions. If it is your project, then you should offer to take a leading role in the proposed project. You shouldn't necessarily ask someone to work with you and then ask them to do more work than yourself. Or if you're a little further along, you can strike up a conversation with a potential collaborator, but then offer your group's expertise, maybe an instrument that you have at your university that they don't have access to. Or your connections with other collaborators that they might be interested in. So you really do, you don't just want to take something from someone, but you also need to give something in return. So let's say you've got to the point where you're starting to develop a project, you've got some collaborators on board, so now it's time to build your research program. Importantly, it's essential to clearly define the main goals and expected outcomes of your research program from the beginning, specifically during the development phase with your other collaborators. This is where things can sometimes get a little bit more difficult, which is why it's very important to make sure that all team members know their roles and responsibilities from the beginning. And as I just said, people get busy, unexpected circumstances can happen. So as a collaborator, you need to be prepared to offer a significant time commitment yourself. Every now and then, you might need to pick up the slack, so to speak, fill in the workload of somebody else if they can't stay on track for one reason or another. Importantly, if you are just starting to think about establishing collaborations, whether they're domestic or international, we suggest starting relatively small. It's important that large projects are much more complex than small ones. They require substantial resources, and in order for you to be successful in establishing a large project, you probably want to have some experience with smaller ones beforehand. With that, we suggest that you start with a pilot or a short-term study. This will not only assess the feasibility of the science that you're trying to do, but it will also kind of test whether or not you and that potential collaborator work well together. Are you going to be able to accomplish your tasks productively and successfully? Furthermore, conducting a pilot study is oftentimes a very helpful thing for you to build kind of a larger funding proposal or grant proposal in the future with that collaborator. When you're building your research program, as well as maintaining it years down the road, perhaps, it's important to be flexible. There's oftentimes odds of misunderstanding that can come up, and this is actually pretty high. You also need to understand that things might not go as smoothly as you expect them to. So successful collaborations, specifically international ones, require an exceptional degree of communication between all collaborators within the project. And as I mentioned previously, it's important to understand the concept of give and take. A collaboration is a project between equals, and everyone does get busy. So patience is really required from yourself and from your team members. So as you're building your international collaborations, your domestic collaborations, it's important to understand that it's not always going to be smooth. There are going to be difficulties and obstacles that you're going to encounter. From an international standpoint, you need to be aware of cultural differences. This is ever more important now. You want to maintain an open mind and a flexible attitude. We actually recommend, doing a little homework yourself if you are going to establish an international connection. You should know the most pertinent cultural differences between all of your collaborators' countries. And this is something that you can just do a little bit of research on and be able to address. In the beginning, face-to-face discussions are also best, especially at the early stages of collaboration. This often comes in line with conferences or meetings. This is where you get to know potential collaborators in a little bit more of a relaxed atmosphere. If this is something that you can accomplish, that's great. Might be a little bit more difficult now, but I think that you should keep this in mind. Another difficulty that you might encounter is a collaborator that, looked great on paper, but doesn't necessarily deliver. So they're an unreliable collaborator. They may have gotten very high marks from somebody that you trusted, but unfortunately that didn't work out. This is a very difficult situation to deal with. This might be something that I throw at our guest speakers for their insight on, but it is important to understand that this could happen, and you will have to address this issue, but also be willing to kind of pick up the slack from that collaborator if needed. Another thing to be aware of are dissemination policies or intellectual policy rights. So these are regulations that you should familiarize yourself with before you guys start working together. This is something that you need to understand, and they are likely different by institution or different by countries. For example, some groups may assume that if you are all PIs on a project that you are all granted co-authorship right off the bat. This might not be something that is standard practice in a different country or within a different research group. So you should be very clear about how things would move forward in the end. Sharing of resources can be an obstacle moving forward. This can be something that's very unequal, especially if you're an early career scientist and you're working with someone who is very established. The established person might have many more resources than you're able to give. As a result, you should be assisting where and when you can, bringing your expertise in when you can. And of course, being very open with your collaborators about how you feel about things like that. Conflicts of interest can also arise through collaborations. Oftentimes there are authorship issues, as I mentioned previously, and as data availability is becoming more open and important for publishing, there can be exchange policies that vary between countries and institutions that collaborators should be aware of. And then lastly, there's always the financial component to collaborations, which are basically projects. You will be working with others, and as a result, each person will have to budget for their specific part of that collaboration, which can ultimately lead to a very expensive project. And oftentimes certain people will have to lower their budgets while others may not, or everyone will work together. So this is an important thing to be open for discussion moving forward. So with that, I want to invite anyone to ask any additional questions, and I want to bring back in our speakers so that we can have a Q&A discussion here. And I think I'm going to unshare my screen so that we can see our guest speakers with us. And again, if there are any additional questions as we get the discussion going, please insert those questions into the Q&A function so that our organizers can address them.
I'm unable to start my video. Is that, it says that the host has stopped it. Did you someone stop my video?
I will check. Let's see. Not the.
Oh, maybe got it now.
I think you got it now.
Yeah,
all right,
okay,
great. Well, while I go through this, I just want to start with a question of my own. So both of you are very established professors right now. You've had successful research programs. But it would be great if you could elaborate maybe for some of our more early career scientists, how you got started specifically. Don, would you mind taking off with that? So what were your international collaborations as a graduate student? How did you start your programs that you've been keeping very successful for the past, decades or so?
Oh, yeah, well, as a student, I was very fortunate to have opportunities handed to me by my PhD advisor to first go to New Zealand in 1984 for my master's thesis fieldwork. And I established a number of relationships there, but never did go back as a research scientist. After that, I shifted gears and was handed another great opportunity, and that was to start to work in Peru in 1986. And I had no idea what was going to follow that, but for the next three and a half decades, that's where most of my work has been done. And I started as a young PhD student working in the Northern Andes of Peru, and it was during, I ended up getting a Fulbright fellowship to live and work in Peru for 1 year. And that long period of time, that extended period of time really helped me get established there, to learn Spanish, to meet a lot of the Peruvian geologists and begin to make some relationships that some of which some of the people that I met in 1986, I still work with today. So that it was really fortuitous to have the opportunity to start to go there. And it turned out it was a time of a lot of political unrest. So there were not very many people foreigners working in Peru at the time. And so there was not a lot of competition to work in different parts of the Andes. And as a geologist, we need to find field sites that haven't been worked yet. And so there was a lot of opportunities to do the first work, and that was wonderful. And I've just, things have just opened up, year after year after year ever since then to keep working there. So it's, it was never a plan to go to Peru and stay there for the next 3 decades, but it just kept getting more and more interesting. And once you get established in a place, the funding becomes more reliable as you get established. I think that's a really important point, is that the first few years can be kind of lean until you get some papers out, and getting published in a field, in a new area, geographically or in a subdiscipline, is really important to establishing your bona fides, so that when you go and write a research proposal or contact a potential collaborator, you have some established track record already. And to the extent that you can, getting a paper out is super important and can really help.
Well, thank you, Don. Those are some very, very good points. And Joe, would you like to elaborate on your experience as an early career scientist?
Sure. Yeah, I could offer a little bit of insight in how I first got involved in international collaborations. I was in I think the final year of my PhD program, and it was actually other scientists from France and the University of Paris Sud who reached out to me because they knew that I'd been working on some developing new geochemical techniques as part of my PhD that would be very helpful to their research group. So they invited me over to Paris, and I went there for a couple of weeks, and that was all really about transfer of knowledge and training of their lab technicians in these new techniques that I've been developing. And I found that to be incredibly exciting, very rewarding. And my French was really not that good at the time. It still isn't, but Avi, you mentioned language barriers. I think it's important to consider that aspect. But in any case, that was a really rewarding experience for me as a PhD student, and I felt good about helping them out to basically bring their lab techniques up to another level. And then beyond that, my next international experience was to develop projects on the glacial and volcanic history of Iceland. And for that, I was the one who actively pursued international colleagues. And Iceland is a country of, maybe 300,000 people. There's one primary university where most of the scientists work. And I felt that it was very important for me to make as strong connections as possible with them before going over to Iceland. I did have some funding, but I was very concerned about going there and isolating myself from the local scientists. I really wanted to work with them collaboratively, and fortunately they were very receptive to that. And I think one thing to always keep in mind, if you're working internationally and you're actually working in that country, you're a guest of that country, and the local scientists can be your hosts. And that's how that worked for me in Iceland, and I greatly appreciated that, and I still have those connections in my career to this day. And then my other experience working in South America, actually some of this is connected to Don's work. We worked together, and before I really expanded my research in South America, I wanted to know who was working on what. I didn't want to step on any toes. And since Don had been established there for some time before I started working in Peru, I actually reached out to Don, and then I found international connections through his group, which was also helpful. And I've continued to work there to this day. So just a couple of thoughts on different aspects of working internationally. Some of these are probably, biased towards what we do as earth scientists and geologists. We do travel to the places that we're working. So it is important to establish those local connections.
Oh, it's all very important indeed. So both of you were discussing connections that you primarily make between other academics and academic institutions, but we do have some questions from attendees here on how difficult it is to also collaborate with maybe industry, for example. Have either of you had any industry collaborations or had to deal with any sort of government policies in your international collaborations that you had to be aware of?
Well, not much on the industry side, but in terms of government policies, maybe if I could use the term regulations, we've had to deal with a lot of importing issues with a lot of equipment that we've brought in to Peru mostly, and that's been a real challenge. And that actually could not have been done without a lot of local help. We had a large lake drilling project to take a sediment core from a high lake in the Andes. And this project started about in the early 2000s, and it took about 10 years just to get it off the ground, to get it established. And in those 10 years, a lot of my time was spent talking with Peruvians and Peruvian organizations on how we would work with the logistics of getting a lot of equipment into the country and the permitting. And so there was a lot of time spent with local universities there, establishing relationships, giving talks at local universities, and even taking a position as a visiting professor at one university, just to have the formal established contact in the country. So that project, which culminated in 2015 with the drilling of Lake Junin in the central Peruvian Andes, that project required way more international collaborations than anything else I've done. And there was a lot of regulations that we had to deal with. We had to hire attorneys and people who could negotiate the customs agencies to bring equipment in, and have formal partners who were on board to receive the equipment and be involved in a real legitimate way. So, yeah, there was a pretty thick web of regulations to deal with. But other than that, well, actually, I should back up. We did work with a Peruvian drilling company that was really in the mining industry, and we established contacts with them a few years before the drilling started, and they were just interested from I think they just wanted to do something different from drilling for mining interests. They saw this as a way of establishing their portfolio or widening their portfolio of projects. So they took this project on, and they were great. They were great to work with. They were really interested just in the whole project, and I'm sure it wasn't a big money maker for them, but they got intrigued by the science behind it. So I suppose one of the ways to get things done in country is if you can get people excited about what you're doing. And it took a little bit of getting some local press involved in what was happening. And it took a lot of time to get that all established.
Thank you. That was a very good answer. It sounds like there's a lot of different tasks that go into establishing a collaboration. I think it's important for our attendees to understand that getting a big research program up on the ground isn't something that's going to happen, within the time frame of a year. It's something that is a lot of development and time to be successful. And yeah, like you said, a lot of different conversations and discussion with a variety of different outlets. So one question I wanted to ask both of you is kind of tied into one of our questions by some of our attendees, which is, the attendees' question is specifically, is there an optimal number of collaborators for a project? Have you guys felt like you've been on collaborations that are very well balanced? Do you feel like you've been on some that have too many PIs and that's led to any sort of difficulties? Joe, do you want to take this one for us?
I could start this off. I would say the number of collaborators that you think is most appropriate for your project is probably dictated by the expertise that you need to get that project done. Generally speaking, funding agencies are going to not look favorably upon too much overlapping expertise, because I think actually, maybe you mentioned this earlier, you need to demonstrate that you have a balance of expertise. If you have two investigators who essentially do the same thing and have the same expertise, it could be difficult to justify why both of them should be on a project. So I would say when you're designing a project and thinking about what you want to get accomplished, you should think about what balance of expertise is going to be most beneficial to that project. And I think it's also, there's a general rule that the more collaborators you have, the more expensive your project is going to be, but also potentially more complicated, because then you're going to be balancing a greater number of individuals, and many of them at different institutions, and it actually could lead to a decrease in efficiency in getting the work done. I tend to be attracted to leaner projects where everyone plays a well-defined role, and that's clear from the outset, and that's how the work gets done.
Yeah, I totally agree with Joe. I would just add that one of the complexities that comes with a big project involves co-authorship of papers. And the more PIs you have, and there's, commonly they have students that are also involved, more complicated the matrix of deciding how co-authorship works is. And I've never had to deal with this in any other project except the large drilling project that I mentioned earlier. But as we begin to get papers together on that, the discussions about who is included as an author and in what order, and gets very, very complicated. Now, we couldn't have done that project without a lot of collaborators, so there was no way to make that really lean. But I guess the answer to Avi's question would be the question of how many collaborators. I would say as few as you can get away with and pull it off. And because yes, it does make it more expensive, it makes it a bit more cumbersome, less efficient, and it also can lead to some challenging situations with respect to authorship.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So again, it's like kind of setting yourself up to make it as smooth as possible and avoid any, difficulties down the road. So one of our questions here from our attendees, which is a little bit different from what we've been talking about, is whether or not there's any organizations or assistance for helping individuals establish international collaborations. This may not be something that you're familiar with, but I think it really hits on the point that as researchers, we are, expected to take on a lot of tasks that we're not really trained to do necessarily, and they're kind of expectations that we have to fill. So it would be good if you guys could give some tips, whether or not there are organizations that you're aware of, but for students in particular, what are the best ways for people to get started with their collaborations? It's a big question.
I could just basically fess up that I don't have a lot of experience in working with international, yeah, that's a tough question. I don't think I have a good answer for that necessarily from my own experience. I do know that, in some cases, logistical support is essential, and that logistical support, whether it's, transport of people and gear, or dealing with customs agents at airports to get your samples back home, can be pretty complicated. And so it's good to have local expertise and local collaborators who can help you coordinate those aspects of the project. And in some cases, you can't do your work internationally without that logistical support and local expertise. I'm not sure if that's really the answer to the question that's being asked, though.
I might just pivot off of that to answer something, to provide an answer to some question that's related, and that I would point out that both Joe and I have been associate editors of a journal, and we sought as associate editors articles from outside the U.S., mostly from South America, and at least at the time that I was the associate editor, we were trying to get scientific articles coming in from Latin America, and get more representation in the journal of that part of the world. And one of the challenges that has to do with getting young researchers started was English, and the quality of the written report. And I remember that there were a number of cases where manuscripts came in that were just not ready for review because the English just wasn't good enough. And on a couple of cases, we would farm it out to people who could help edit it for English, but that was a real impediment. And I think if there was any way we would always encourage the authors to get an English speaker to help them craft this thing in a way that it could go out for review, because the science might have been fine, but the English just wasn't there, and the journals are not going to be editing for English. So that was a hurdle that was a real impediment, I think, for young scientists, particularly in Latin America, to get started. And that first paper, I think, that first published paper is a really important one to establish your your seriousness in the field, and that can really open up collaborations down the road. I think that's the other way that we find our collaborators is through what's been published, and we contact each other that way. So the sooner that you can get some papers out on, or a paper out on a field of interest, the better. Obviously, you need to have a project before you can publish things, but so it's a little bit of a chicken and egg question. But for sure, you know, when paper manuscripts are ready for submission, trying to get somebody who's a good English writer would really help.
I think that's very important. And publishing is, of course, many researchers' goals. We actually do have a question here from the attendees on if you guys could discuss the impact of publishing articles with authors from different countries. Do you think, you are both editors and you're both full professors at your institutions, do you think that scientists having international publications or a mix of authors from international backgrounds on a publication is stronger than a group of authors from the same institution, for example?
I could maybe start to answer that and before I hand it over to Don, but yeah, I would say that it's not always going to be the case because it depends on what the project focus is, but generally speaking, it's looked upon favorably if you have established international connections. Not just that you're publishing papers with international colleagues, but that the work that you're working on is actually recognized beyond your local scientific community. This becomes something I think that grows in importance as you go further along in your career. If you're fortunate enough to have opportunities like Don and I had pretty early on to work internationally, that's definitely something that's to your benefit. But at least where I work at the University of New Hampshire, and I think in many places, it's a criterion for promotion that's very explicitly stated. To be fully promoted to full professor, for example, we tend to look for evidence of international recognition of a research program, and that becomes very important. I would say that's not necessarily something to be at the top of your agenda as you're first starting your career, but if this is something you want to build towards as you're thinking about advancing in your position, that you will need to be establishing an internationally recognized program, and at least in many universities here in the US, to become fully promoted.
What is the case at Union College, Don? Is it similar?
So yeah, Union College, we're a private undergraduate institution with a strong emphasis on research, but we don't have graduate students, so the research expectations are a little bit lower, but still, I would say it's probably not as important where I am to have international programs and international collaborators, but it certainly helps establish your to demonstrate your the maturity, so to speak, of your science, that you are collaborating with people outside of your university, at least, and perhaps outside of your country, and that just furthers your sort of maturation as a scientist. I think absolutely.
Yeah, so that is something that our attendees I think it's good for them to hear. It is something that people need to be thinking about down the road if it is required at an institution, but it's also good to know that there's variability in different institutions and the requirements that they have for moving forward in your career. Before we end the webinar, which we're not doing quite yet, so people can still continue asking questions, we do have a few questions kind of addressing some of the obstacles in collaborations. One of which is kind of what you do when you have an unreliable collaborator. What have you guys encountered? I feel like you probably must have had some collaborators that weren't quite as responsive previously. Do you have any tips for addressing those sort of issues with your partners? Joe, do you want to go for this one?
Sure, that's a really good question, and I've been fortunate to not really have had too many experiences with collaborators who weren't delivering or, and ended up being unreliable. But in those cases, I think I would say the same thing, whether it's an international collaboration or any collaboration. If you're collaborating with someone and they're not being a team player, then it's, of course, if you're all funded together, you have a mandate to get your work done. So you need to find a way to work with these people who might not be as reliable as you'd hoped to get your work done. But it's certainly up to you when it comes time to fund a new project or develop a new research initiative. You pick your collaborators carefully, and you do that based on past experience with people and also reputation. So I would say careers are too short to work with unreliable people. But if you've already established a connection and you're funded and you have a mandate to get the work done, then it can be challenging, and it's important to find ways to work collaboratively and collegially with those folks.
I think that's a great answer. Don, I'm going to kind of throw you a different question, since you mentioned that you had a pretty complex project that ran into some authorship problems. One of our questions here is, how do you decipher the line of authorship if collaborators are, the same level of expertise? How do you have that conversation, and, what are some good tips for folks trying to figure out the authorship situations?
Yeah, so it was a year ago just about that we had the first flare up in this question about authorship, and I dug into the literature a little bit, and the medical community has some papers on authorship, rules of authorship. And I remember making a spreadsheet of all the potential authors and what category of contribution they made, and kind of coming up with a scoring system that kind of was what led to the order of authorship. And yeah, it took some real thinking about how to make that work. I think we've fortunately for the project, we had some really excellent graduate students who took the lead on various aspects of the project, and they were the natural first authors in the papers of their creation. But it was the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth, and so forth authors that, in what order they should come and so forth, that became, and in fact, who was even included as an author, and did they actually contribute to either the writing, the project design, the funding? I can't remember what all the different categories were, but did they meet at least one or more of those? And if they didn't, and if they were just there, say in the field, because we're doing field work, is that enough to be an author? And in most cases, it's not. There needs to be some intellectual contribution to the project, but it can get very. The trick is to be consistent and to be open with your group about how it's going to work, so that there aren't any. And I guess in hindsight, it would have been a whole lot better to have established sort of the rules of authorship early, so everybody understood what the metrics were going to be. And in the end, I think we got it about right. But we tried to err on more inclusion than exclusion. But there became a point where we had to say no to some people, and they weren't happy. Yeah, it's tricky, and that's the other reason to keep projects lean, as I mentioned, is that the authorship can be complicated.
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated topic. And actually, if our attendees are interested in the policies that Don was just speaking of, Clark has put some links in the chat if you guys want to check that out on the rules and responsibilities for how to define co-authors on papers. So I do have maybe a few more questions before we end the webinar. One of which is a lot of the tips for networking and things like that I had mentioned are, of course, conferences and meetings, which is changing right now with our current circumstances. So our attendees are curious if both of you have any suggestions for developing collaborations in general as we're in the COVID stage right now. What do you think are the best ways for researchers of any career level to initiate or even maintain their collaborations?
Oh, that's a great question. I could chime in first. I recently participated in a virtual meeting that was originally going to be held in person. And instead, of course, everything was converted to an online platform. I gave a talk, other people gave talks, and there were questions and answers, much like we're doing now in the webinar, that were primarily coming in through chats and the Q&A function in Zoom. And it's in some ways it makes it a lot more difficult to network and establish connections with other folks. But on the other hand, my experience was that more people tuned into my talk than would have necessarily walked into a room at a conference center to see it. So that's one way that is maybe something that could facilitate greater exposure and opportunities for networking and establishing collaborations. Unfortunately, if we're going to be continuing in a sort of an online platform, it's going to rely on emails and chats and other ways of reaching out to people virtually, which I have to say I'd rather have an in-person conversation with folks, but the networking and my experience from this past very recent conference was that I got a lot of good emails back and forth with colleagues and potentially establish some new connections that might lead to new projects.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we're where we are. We have to manage in this new world for at least the near term future. And you know, the irony when we talk about as geologists doing field work, we can't even go in the field for an unknown amount of time either. So the very projects that we are proposing and searching out collaborators for are not even possible at the current time. But I have had a number of, or one particular project that we're beginning to get off the ground, and it's all being done via Zoom. And we have weekly Zoom meetings just to kind of get the scope of the project sorted out, and it's worked pretty well. It's involving four different institutions, and yeah, it can work. You know, it's not ideal, and there's nothing like going to a conference and standing in the hallway for 20 minutes chatting with somebody about some ideas you have. That's invaluable. But this is what it is right now, so we have to deal with it. So I would encourage you all to make efforts and propose Zoom meetings or small Zoom meetings to sketch out potential projects and get people on board. And I think once you break the ice on some of these things, then there can be it's a lot easier to get the second meeting going and then the third meeting going and so forth, and lay down an agenda for each one, so it's not just sort of open forum. But you know, you can establish collaborators in this day, and I think we're going to have to for a while.
I think that's very important. Yeah. One of our other questions was, you know, is it helpful to directly contact potential collaborators through email? And I think it is important. And it's basically just what you said. It's okay to reach out to others and to break the ice. And, you know, you won't know what's going to happen unless you try. So I think attendees are encouraged to do that. And so I guess with that, I want to ask you guys one more question. I always like to end with these difficult open-ended questions. But if each of you are maybe working together, what do you think are maybe the 3 most important aspects for a successful collaboration in research?
You want to start with that, Joe? I can go.
Yeah,
okay.
I can do one. You can do the other 2.
Okay.
I guess one thing I would say, regardless of whether it's an international collaboration or not, is to do your part and deliver on that part of the project that you said you would deliver on, and be respectful of your colleagues, especially when things don't progress as quickly as you might want them to. I think everybody recognizes that in many situations, tasks and objectives take longer to accomplish than many people originally envisioned. So I think patience is important. But I think being a team player is probably, I don't know, I think #1 on the list. To be working with your colleagues, not for, you know, your own benefit, but for the benefit of the entire team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I would say closely related is communication, and some things as basic as returning emails in prompt in some prompt amount of time, so that you don't go into radio silence and people wonder what, you know, what's happened to so and so and why aren't they responding. I mean, that's really basic, of course, but it does happen that occasionally people aren't producing and you can't. They're not responding to emails for whatever reason. So that's being punctual in communication is and open in communication is super important as well. I would also add that, you know, bringing, you know, something new to the table, or maybe even adding some value to a project that you didn't imagine you could when you started, taking the extra step, showing some initiative, not just doing what you said you were going to do, but maybe pursuing something on your own time to advance the project and maybe even develop a new project that spins off of the former project. Those are all really good indicators that you're going to be a great collaborator in the future, and people will want to work with you because they see you as somebody who's taking the initiative and coming up with new ideas and maybe even entirely new projects. And those are the kind of people that we want to work with, because, you know, you're adding energy to the system. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys. And I think with that, we're gonna end the webinar today. I do want to address one other question, which was commonly asked throughout the chat, and that's whether or not there is a forum or a platform that researchers can go to discuss collaborations. And actually there is. Our sponsor today is PeerRef, peerref.com. This would be something that you've seen on our registration, and I believe is also associated with our follow-up of today's webinar. If you do go to peerref.com, it's an academic social network where you can create a profile and discuss any sort of international collaboration with other users on that platform as well. So check that out after the webinar today. With that, I do want to remind everyone that you will receive a follow-up email, which will include the full recording of today's webinar, as well as a link to the certificate of completion, if that's something that you need or desire. And with that, I want to thank our two guest speakers today, Don Rodbell and Joe Licciardi, for joining us and providing excellent insight into international collaborations and academic careers. You were you have very positive praise in the chat room and in the questions that I can see here. So thank you both for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for inviting us.
And with that, I want to thank the attendees for joining us, and I hope to see everyone next month for our August webinar. All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.